If you've ever observed bats in a zoo or in the night sky, you've likely noticed that they have several features in common with birds, such as wings. However, bats are actually more closely related to rodents and primates than they are to birds. Today, scientists agree that species should be classified based on evolutionary relationships rather than just physical similarities. Chapter 18, Section 2, Classification based on evolutionary relationships. Key concept. Modern classification is based on evolutionary relationships. Main ideas. Cladistics is a classification based on common ancestry, and molecular evidence reveals species relatedness. First main idea. Cladistics is classification based on common ancestry. Similar traits between species are often the result of sharing a common ancestor, such as the ancestor shared by dogs and wolves. However, scientists now know that similar traits, such as the wings of bats and birds, can also evolve in species that are adapting to similar environmental conditions. As you've learned so far, this process is called convergent evolution. To classify species according to how they are related, scientists must look at more than just physical traits. Modern classification is based on identifying evolutionary relationships using evidence from living species, the fossil record, and molecular data. The evolutionary history for a group of species is called a phylogeny. Phylogenies can be shown as a branching tree diagram. In a way, these types of diagrams are like family trees. The branches of a family tree show how many family members are related to each other. The branches of an evolutionary tree show how different groups of species are related to each other. The most common method used to make evolutionary trees is called cladistics. Cladistics is classification based on common ancestry. The goal of cladistics is to place species in the order in which they descended from the common ancestor. A cladogram is a diagram based on patterns of shared, derived traits that shows the evolutionary relationships between groups of organisms. At the root of the words cladistics and cladogram is the word clade. A clade is a group of species that shares a common ancestor. For example, the glyptodon, shown on the screen here, is the common ancestor of about 20 modern species of armadillos. Together, the glyptodon and all of its descendants form a clade. Through the course of evolution, certain traits change in some species of a clade, but stay the same in other species. Therefore, each species in a clade has some traits from its ancestors that have not changed, such as the similar shells of glyptodons and modern armadillos. Organisms that do not share a common trait with the rest of the group are branched off into their own clade. The traits that can be used to figure out evolutionary relationships among a group of species are those that are shared by some species but not present in others. These traits are called derived characteristics. As you will soon see, cladograms are made by figuring out which derived characteristics are shared by which species. The more closely related species are, the more derived characteristics they will share. A group of species that shares no derived characteristics with the other groups being studied is called an outgroup. The main figures of a cladogram are actually shown on the screen here. Tetrapods are vertebrates that have 4 limbs: amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Some tetrapods, such as snakes and marine mammals, no longer have the 4 limbs that their known ancestors had. However, they are still members of the tetrapoda clade because they share a common ancestor. In a cladogram, Groups of species are placed in order by the derived characteristics that have added up in their lineage over time. This order is hypothesized to be the order in which they descended from their common ancestor. Derived characters are shown as hash marks between the branches of the cladogram. All species above the hash mark share the derived character it represents. Each place where a branch splits is called a node. There are 5 nodes on the tetrapod cladogram. The first node is where the amphibian branch splits off from the rest of the cladogram. Nodes represent the most recent common ancestor shared by a clade. Therefore, the first node of the tetrapod cladogram represents a common ancestor for the whole tetrapod clade. You can identify clades by using the snip rule. Whenever you snip a branch under a node, a clade falls off. In this cladogram, if you were to snip below the node where turtles and tortoises branch off, you would be left with the reptilia clade. This clade includes turtles and tortoises, lizards and snakes, crocodiles and alligators, and birds. As you can see, each clade is nested within the clade that forms just before it. There are 5 clades in the tetrapod cladogram. Crocodiles, alligators, and birds belong to all 5 clades. Second main idea: molecular evidence reveals species relatedness. It is possible to use physical characteristics, such as protected eggs, to build evolutionary trees. In this example, a protected egg is a derived character shared by all species in the amniota clade. Today, new technology allows biologists to compare groups of species at the molecular level. Molecular evidence, such as a certain DNA sequence, can be used as a derived character if it is shared among certain groups of species. In many cases, molecular data agree with classification based on physical similarities. In other cases, this type of data leads scientists to classify species in a different way. An evolutionary tree is always a work in progress. With new evidence, trees can be changed to show how species are likely related. For example, based on physical traits, most biologists considered segmented worms and arthropods, which are crabs, lobsters, insects, and their relatives, to be more closely related to each other than to any other group of species. However, the discovery of a certain hormone has provided new information. This hormone affects molting, and it is found only in arthropods and roundworms. Biologists have now proposed a new evolutionary tree, which is pictured on the screen here. In this tree, roundworms and arthropods are grouped closer together. This tree is based on the idea that the hormone evolved only once, in an ancestor shared by both arthropods and roundworms. Proteins and genes are also used to help learn about evolutionary relationships. In fact, DNA is considered by many scientists to have the last word when figuring out how related two species are to each other. After all, any traits that can be passed down on into the next generation must have a genetic basis. The more similar to each other the genes of the two species are, the more closely related the species are likely to be. In the next section, you will see how DNA and protein sequences can be used to measure evolutionary time itself. This video has been Chapter 18, Section 2, Classification Based on Evolutionary Relationships. Key concept: modern classification is based on evolutionary relationships. Main ideas: cladistics is classification based on common ancestry, and molecular evidence reveals species relatedness.